So behind me here, this is the Natural History Museum, and it looks a bit like a cathedral. It has these enormous high ceilings. It has a huge nave kind of welcoming area, and as you go through the museum, it's a little bit like being a pilgrim, visiting all of God's creatures along the way. And this is no coincidence. The people who designed and conceived of the idea of this museum back in the 19th century had exactly this mindset, that the natural world reflected God's mind. It was stable, it was coherent, and it was beautiful. So in the world that Darwin was born into, he was born in 1809, it was a world which was extremely stable. It was a world where there was a coherence between human life and the environment, like a profound coherence. So if you wanted to contact God, or if you wanted to understand God better, of course, you had the traditional ways you could do that, through being a good Protestant and reading your Bible, or being a good Catholic and going to church and taking the sacraments, being a Quaker, sitting in the quiet, or, and this is a deeper level of coherence, you could find God through science. The development of science through the centuries, up to the point where Darwin is born, is all a compliment to God. Let's just take, for example, Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, through the development of his physics, had understood the mechanics of the universe. He discovered the laws of cause and effect, laws of gravity, and so on. And by studying Newton's physics, it's almost as if you could see inside the mechanical mind of God. You could kind of read the algorithms of God's mind. And the universe was understood by Newton himself to be an expression of the divine mind. And so when Newton understood the laws of gravity, motion, cause and effect, and so on, it was as if he was seeing inside this beautiful piece of machinery like a clock. And in fact, Newton was most likely, we don't know for sure, but Newton was likely to be a deist. And if you're a deist, you're not so much interested in the more traditional ways to God, like through the sacraments or through the Bible. If you're a deist, the central gravity for your belief is more to understand God as the first cause of the universe, God as this ultimate being out there that designed the universe and set it in motion, like a watchmaker. And in fact, that word watchmaker was sharply relevant to Darwin, because when Darwin was at Cambridge, which is where we're going next, when he was studying at Cambridge University, he was quite attentive to the texts of a writer called William Paley. So William Paley wrote a book in 1802 called Natural Theology. And in this book, Natural Theology, Paley argues that we could understand God as a divine watchmaker, but not in the Newtonian sense of the watch, but in a biological sense. So that if you were to look at all the different species on the planet, all the different animals and plants and so on, you could find evidence there of God's mind, because God had evidently designed the universe. And if you have design in the universe, says Paley, it kind of implies that there's a designer, a grand designer. So most famously he talks about the human eye. So just dissect the human eye. The intricacy of that design, its purposefulness, indicates that some mind had to be at work in order for that thing to exist. He also looked at various birds and how they fly. He thought that was amazing, so that must have been done by God. He looked even at the beak of a woodpecker and so on. Now, the thing was that at the beginning of the 19th century, this coherence between belief in God and the natural world, it led people, of course, to do like animal collection, like to enjoy God's wonderful creation. And so at the beginning of the 1800s, there were collections of animals in boxes, like taxonomically arranged according to the background system of Linnaeus, a Swedish Enlightenment thinker that had thought through the different kingdoms and different layers of the animal world and the plant world. So they were collecting into boxes all these different animals, shells, butterflies, etc., etc. But they were a little bit disorganized and, well, they weren't being looked after very well. And so I said at the beginning of this short video that this could be understood as a cathedral. That's certainly true. But you could also almost understand it like a Noah's Ark, that the animals were led in 2 by 2 here. This place was conceived by a guy called Waterhouse. He designed it, and you could almost imagine it as him designing Noah's Ark and leading these animals into safety, because there's a few case studies of, for example, a box of shells that was trying to be transported from one site of preservation in London to another. Somebody dropped it in the wind and all the shells were lost. So here they thought, well, let's construct a building where it's safe and we can enjoy God's creation, and all the animals can be nicely arranged and people can go on like a pilgrimage to worship God through this beautiful sort of living sacred text. Now, the person that was responsible for this whole idea of building this place and bringing these collections together was a man called Richard Owen. Now, we'll get to him a little bit later in the next video, but before we do that, just to capture a sense of what it was like to be alive when Darwin was born in 1809. Let's just have a little bit of music. This is a bit of Beethoven in the first decade of the 19th century. So when Darwin was born, Beethoven was composing his symphonies. He was up to about number 6, number 7. They were being premiered, but he was well into the flow of his compositional work. And his Beethoven's 6th symphony is actually called the Pastoral Symphony. Beethoven celebrated nature. Beethoven himself didn't see any threat of the natural world to belief in God. Everything's coherent. The background tapestry of the world in a way is reflective of the divine order. Now, we're just going to listen to a clip now of Ivan Fischer, a conductor, guiding us through some of the notes and the harmonies in Beethoven's 4th symphony. So not the Pastoral Symphony, but you'll hear in this and through Ivan Fischer's beautiful description how nature was there in a way to celebrate God. Nature was there as this backdrop to human existence. Humans were the pinnacle of creation. Humans were the greatest of all animals. We were the rational ones. We were the ones with the sense of meaning and purpose. We were made in the image of God. just like on the last day of creation, humans are installed by God as its final act, as its ultimate expression of God's image. And here in Beethoven, you can see Beethoven is, you can hear in Beethoven that this notion of man as this sort of divine, and that coherence with nature really comes alive in the way in which the music works. So, yeah, end of this first video here, and just listen to that beautiful coherence between man, God, and nature.
What I find an extraordinary moment in the first movement of the Fourth Symphony is like if it would lose its way, you know, it gets into a kind of dead end. Where are we? Where shall we go? And then there is this insecurity. And then you suddenly hear the flute like is a modulation like the sun would come out from the clouds. And then suddenly there is the solution. And then suddenly little plants appeared, maybe the first crocuses, you know, something of a spring. And here, and then everywhere, and then here is like the beautiful warm weather would be suddenly here. Okay. But listen to this incredible transition. So it loses its way. Listen to the flute. It's coming soon. Where are we? We are lost. Nowhere to go.
Nowhere land.
Yeah, it's lost. And the flute? Sunshine comes out. And now listen to these little first flowers. Here, there. Another one. Here. They spring out. More and more. And here we are. Everybody. Isn't it wonderful?
That's wonderful.